once again. Welcome to the Perceptional, elevating all your senses, expanding your curiosity. So plug in now as we welcome your host, Dr. James Denito.
Welcome back to the Perceptional. Today we have an exceptional guest, one who I've been thinking about bringing into the studio for years that I've known him, and now we have to expedite the process as he is sadly moving away from our beautiful hometown here down in Texas. Mihai Nadin, an esteemed professor, doctor, learned one, researcher, scientist, lecturer, and a fellow human, parent. We have it all here, and we are happy to have him in the studio today. We're going to be specifically talking about a book of his that was written about 10 years ago, and from that point on, we'll move into other areas of writing and a newer book that is out that I'm even more excited about, as it may help us predict the future, what is coming for us. The reason you're on this show is because you're curious, and that is one of our mottos of the show: elevate your curiosity, expand your curiosity. The word cure is in the word curiosity in the root, and Professor Nadin has had plenty of curiosity, endless curiosity, and I think it's keeping him very young at the age of 85 and going strong. And we are going to miss him around here, but we're glad to have him in the studio. This book, called Are You Stupid?, was written about 10 years ago, and I think it took 7 years for you to put this together from what I read. And I must say, as I am almost through the book, I should have read it years ago, but as I said, I have many things lined up in front of me, and sometimes I should have prioritized something like this because I am very impressed with the way this book is structured. When I read some of your other writings, the scientific papers that I enjoy thoroughly, I was worried as I picked this up if this was for the general public's consumption, if it would be written in a manner where people could understand it, not be overwhelmed by the dialogue itself, and perhaps even the attention to detail that you have. This is an amazing book when it comes to the amount of research you have put into finding the ways to weave together our progression as a society here. And we're specifically talking about America here, but it's really a microcosm of what's going on in the world, I think, per se. The main reason you told me you wrote this book is you want to make a difference, something that gives maybe hope or maybe make a difference in how you go to sleep at night. Is there anything you could add to what drove you to put this much time into a book?
I thought that I have an obligation towards this country that adopted me. Many are coming to the country and taking it for granted. I found the opportunities related to being adopted by the United States not to be comparable to any other country. I lived in other places. You will never become like you become an American living here. You will never become a German or a French or whatever. You will always still be considered alien, not part of it. Therefore, I have this feeling of a debt towards the country. Do I simply enjoy the fact that it's still the best place to be at this moment in the world? It really is. Or do I do something that it can remain the best place in the world? Because we are on a course in which we might no longer be the best place in the world. Therefore, can I do something so that we remain the best place in the world?
Excellent. When I think about just coming up with the title for the book, Are You Stupid?, can be almost a derogatory way, and the way you weave it in with your dialogue, it is very respectful for the intellect of people. I also thought of all the other words you could have come up with that have similar meanings: idiot, imbecile, moron, nincompoop, dimwit, dumb. Did you wrestle with any nomenclature, or was the word stupid the most appropriate for what you were trying to get into people's heads here?
I think that stupid was the only candidate. And the reason is because I'm looking at the expression of stupidity as related to our own behavior, to our own choices. If I would use a word such as moron, you don't have anything that you can influence the fact that somebody looks at you and thinks you're a moron. In terms of stupidity, you have a lot of things you can do in order either to change from a condition of stupidity or to make clear that maybe the person who judges you as being stupid might not have it right. So no, the answer is it was by necessity being stupid, and it was by necessity because one of the characteristics of stupidity is the equivalent, as I made it clear in the book, of stupidity is I don't care. One symptom of stupidity is the condition of a person who says I don't care. That's almost at the core of stupidity.
Wow. Okay.
And I want people to care.
And that's where we're only going to get into emotions and impassionment, getting into something deeper inside of them, will perhaps. You've written over 30, 35 books at least. Is this in your top favorite books in terms of what it means to you? Or are others more meaningful in terms of what you were able to get across as a message, or what you were able to express from your own emotions?
Obviously, my last book will always be the most important, and that's the book that is not yet published. It's the Disrupt Science book, in which I claim that we are in the mess in which we are in these days because science is guiding us in the wrong direction. But let's not discuss that book. Let's stick
Sure. We'll stay with
Are
this.
You Stupid? I think that Are You Stupid is, if not the most important book for me, at least the second. The most important book for me remains The Civilization of Illiteracy, which is a book that had a very strange destiny so far. And almost everything that I described in The Civilization of Illiteracy, a book published in 1998, so it's an old book now, is very current. We are at this moment living through a civilization of illiteracy, which is getting deeper and deeper. So that's why I would say that in terms of what is the most important, the civilization of illiteracy remains the most important.
All right. Fair enough. And since this was 10 years ago, do you have any optimism things are starting to move in a direction you would hope, or is it still going in the downward direction, if we use that term right, compared to what you thought it was going to be at this point?
Honest answer, we are in a worse condition. If at that time I was worried that things might get worse, might deteriorate, at this moment I'm not worried. At this moment I'm asking myself, what can we do? What can each of us do to help the situation? It is a very, very low moment. I will bring to your attention the fact that 10 years ago we were far from the situation of confusion and even desperation in which the country is at this moment. The country is totally torn apart. Torn apart to the extent that you say United States, which United States? What unites these United States? Almost nothing. Only economic interest. If the economy would not be the uniting factor, this country would politically not exist. politically, we are at the moment of a reality that is inviting probably the most pessimistic thoughts. And it comes to mind that shortly after I arrived in the United States, a Russian defector, a member of their KGB, went on TV and described that the KGB had a beautiful plan how to undermine the United States. So remember, there was once upon a time a Soviet Union. That country doesn't exist, but that plan seems to continue. And the first phase of that plan was demoralizing. The country is in a demoralized phase. And the plan that the KGB had was a plan that asked for 35 years in order to reach this state. We are there. Second in their plan was to destabilize. The country is at this moment not in a very stable condition. And I'm afraid that we're going to lose even more of the stability, considering the events of our days. So, yes, things are not looking better, but the optimist in me says when people are desperate, they will find the will, unless they are suicidal. If people are desperate, they will find a better way.
Do you think the USSR came apart because of its own weaknesses, or did the Cold War succeed from what we did externally to cause it to fall apart, so to speak?
I make a comparison in the book between the Soviet Union, which imploded. It was a system-caused implosion. No, the Americans did not force the Soviet Union to fall apart. It was systematic. It was from inside. That kind of system of excessive controls, that part of system of censorship, that part of system of limited individual freedom and initiative cannot survive, period. And it came by necessity to its end. As opposed to the implosion of the Soviet Union, our own implosion might be the result not of copying the Soviet Union, but rather into creating a systemic condition which is also not sustainable.
We're taught that the Cold War was successful because we essentially tricked them into thinking that we really were a threat to them, and they overspent the budgets on military, which did not put enough appropriation of cash flow and economics, basically. So if the economic system is what holds America together and what we were founded on, then if a country goes down, that seems to be the biggest worry about people is the economy. And so it looks like maybe there's some partial accuracy to what they did. We are spending only a limited amount of money on our military, but we have so much black budget stuff that it still may be we're overspending, and money that could be going into the general populace if we want to look at how taxes should flow. I don't know, but the problem I guess we're having in us trying to figure all this out is we want solutions, but we only will find them if we understand how we got here. I was thinking when you mentioned we started out as an economic system and that was our uniting factor, when people are united in purpose by a higher power, their philosophy, their belief, that gives them purpose for the long span, but on a day-to-day purpose, interacting with each other in a civil manner, people have to have something to do, a job, and create commerce. And so if you're a government, that seems to be the best unifying factor I could think of, is give these people something to exchange goods and services with, because once that starts failing, the best thing that seems the government has is fear of a common enemy and giving people something to unite against. And so we always have a war on something. Now a war on terror, the war on communism, the war on the COVID-19 and trying to unite people on these common bonds in here. So I can understand it's really well written on the drive to build this as an economy, but I don't know if they had any other choice how they would start a country like this in a unifying manner. So any extra thoughts on where I'm going here with this one?
I don't really follow your logic, and I say this very carefully. The Soviet Union had resources that are absolutely amazing. The Soviet Union could have survived economically, given their resources, for much, much longer. Look at Russia. Russia is surviving a boycott of all the West because it has the resources. I repeat, the Soviet Union had the resources. What it could not do is to become from a rigid social political system a flexible, an adaptive system. That was gone. That is going away in our country. We have resources. We are still the biggest producer of oil in the world, period. Only the Russians are the second, Very few people are aware of that. So the resources are there. But the system is becoming as rigid as the Soviet system. And at that moment, the economy will sooner or later not be able to carry the project called the United States.
That rigidity, I picked some quotes here that I think are amazingly well spaced in here. When John Adams warned the Constitution was made only for moral and religious people, it is wholly inadequate for the government of any other, he went on to state that only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. So as we become more rigid, that basically is a control system that's coming down over the loss of basically the moral code or that sense of higher purpose. So that makes perfect sense here. In the beginning, one that I really thought about when I saw this, when we talked about the recovery after the Civil War and the North and South starting to go about their business, interacting with each other better. But you wrote, in search of cheap labor, the North substituted immigration for slavery. And I think that's very profound because, in essence, we have all kinds of definitions of slavery today. We don't tend to want to believe that the slavery that existed in the Deep South or in Africa still exists, that kind of indebtedness, but it does. But the slavery of the sweatshops, of children working when they were 8 to 10 years old, why we formed unions, the wages, the tenements that the people lived in, it was a form of slavery, and big business built this country. But it certainly didn't seem, when I think back now, that people came here for that. They felt it was still a better choice. But I guess the only difference is the slaves of the Deep South were really paid nothing, and the people in the North immigrating in rapidly and aggressively, they were paid. They at least felt they were getting something, but they still got nothing by the time they were paying for their food and their housing. But I never quite thought about that. I thought that was pretty amazing. Then when we're talking about what Russia has perhaps set up a long-term program for us, but now we think more about what China's long-term program has been, still communism, and they seem to have made much more aggressive international inroads from where they're physically locating, economically locating control mechanisms, and whether they're buying resources or they loan a company money to build a country, a large shipping dock, they default on the loan and then they take it in possession. So they have a predatory loaning type of mechanism. So you wrote, among the anecdotes circulating in these days is one describing China as a socialist regime with a successful capitalist economy. America, in turn, is described as a capitalist regime with a deteriorating socialist economy. Do you think that may be because maybe more, again, of an outside influence. Now I'm turning around and said, okay, it doesn't seem like maybe we really were responsible for Russia's demise. So can we in turn think that China might be responsible for our demise, or are we still our own worst enemy, you think?
We are our own worst enemy. We made ourselves dependent on China. We wanted to make sure that our population continues to have access to prosperity. The cheapest labor was China. China became our basis for manufacturing and everything. There was a time when you could not find in a store anything what was not made in China. We gave ourselves up to China. But in the process, while we maintain a level of prosperity that, makes everyone happy, and you can have 3 television sets in your house running at the same time, we ignored entirely the political aspect of our relation to China. And China was very happy, said, okay, if you don't care about the political implications, that's fine with us. The result is we are now in a situation in which we're imploring China, please, not only don't help the Russians in their war, which we provoked, not only don't help Russia, but if possible, say one bad word about Russia that will help us. And the Chinese are looking at us and say, don't you notice how really stupid you are? You need a war all the time. This time, after you lost all the wars after World War II, the Americans did not win one war after World War II.
Correct.
So after you lost them all, now you decided to carry on a war in which other people are dying. And you want me, China, to come in and say that's right? No, cannot be. Our dependence on China is so deep that they can only smile. Even our weapons are partially made in China. It's ridiculous. Nobody can really believe it, but that's the reality.
I saw China had on maybe a couple months ago visit to Russia that they had proposed a peace agreement, gave it to basically NATO, and including Ukraine, and threatened that we will help broker this peace deal. We want peace here. But if not, then we will probably end up helping Russia, because this is the stakes. Because if Russia is lost, they are very vulnerable now. They've got no boundary from the aggression from the West. So I don't know what that agreement had in it, but it made China look, at least politically, like the good guys here when we're not so sure about their long-term implications.
China is calling the shots in these days. China brought Iran and Saudi Arabia together. It was always our role to be in that part of the world. We were the guys who had a relation to the Saudis and to Iran. And now China goes in and brings the Saudis and the Iran together. It's almost unbelievable. Why? Because they are in a position in which they can exercise their success, economic success, to the extent that other nations are now listening. We don't have that economic success at this moment.
Yeah. The economics of politics led to a quote where you said, principles do not turn the lever of the voting machines in the USA, money does. I've not as much of a connoisseur of history. I try to be. I at least know a lot more than most Americans do about our history here. But anybody who studies how the politics were from the very beginning of our country, there was a lot of the same corruption and deal-making and the role of money, and even the media. It's just become much more aggressive. Will we ever have a voting system where money is not influencing that anymore? How do we get to the root, the populace in general, without Madison Avenue and advertising, bringing people to the voting polls. I don't know where the solution is other than when we think about our governments have become so big, so centralized, so controlling, and yet the solution seems to be almost like the blockchain is, decentralizing things, getting individual components to have a greater say in the whole situation. So are we all destined to maybe get out of the cities and build small communities back up, and maybe that's the best thing? Or the cities, which continue to draw people for a variety of reasons, may be the only way we're not going to get these things fixed by having people too controlled. Do you think basically where we live, therefore, has something to do with how we get to the grassroots, or is there something else that we're facing that we'll ever have to overcome? All right, so basically I guess the question was, is the fact that we're moving more and more geographically into cities part of the reason that the vote is so controlled by money and media versus when people were smaller and people could have a town hall meeting and things like that?
I experienced the town hall meeting political reality in some localities in New England. You expect it in a little town where there are 1,000 people. They will meet at the town hall and the voting will be so wonderful and wise that everybody will be happy. It turns out that in a corrupted political system, the corruption is like a disease. It contaminates regardless of the scale.
Okay.
Unfortunately. But let's not forget, the United States came into existence as a republic, not as a democracy. We're talking about democracy in a place that was not conceived to be a democracy. If you have a union of various states that have only common economic interests and not common political interests, you cannot have a democracy. You can only witness the corruption of it because it became part of the economy. Politics in the United States is part of the economy. The major players in the media discovered recently that if you run for, let's say, president or whatever you want to run, if your numbers on the media are good, they are going to have you present. If your other candidate, if your competitor has better numbers, they are going to drop you. They don't care. The allegiance is not to ideals, is not to ideas, is not to social impact. The only allegiance is on which candidate can I make more money, and that is the candidate that I'm going to have elected. Period. There is not even a discussion on that. Politics turned into part of the economy can only be as corrupt as the economy is, in which, yes, we know what market economy is. In many cases in the market economy, not the best will succeed.
We'll do some deeper, more quantum thinking as we move from some of the ideas of this book into maybe artificial intelligence. I wrote you a question. We both perceive this reality as non-deterministic or kind of quantum in its outcomes, and yet human behavior in its need to balance the selfish and the selflessness of it all seems very predictable, almost deterministic, based on what the environment is doing to us. We've even seen this with emotions. Years back when I was learning counseling, especially with suicide cases, people would say, they make me feel, you make me feel, and we would say no one can make you feel. It's still a choice, but there's an inevitable choice, it seems, when there is a strong enough influence from the environment here. I guess the question would be, if we are to truly stay flexible, non-deterministic, do we have to change, or does the environment have to change more? In other words, are we on the wrong planet even for why we behave the way we do, almost in a predictable manner?
You have several questions here, and I will choose only one aspect. Deterministic means I can identify a cause in the past to which I associate an outcome. If a system is conditioned, causality is overwritten in the sense that the conditioning becomes the cause.
Okay.
It's important to understand that the environment, as you call it, our planet, is part of a larger system. In that larger system, there are many phenomena that are taking place. From time to time, for instance, we are talking about a very active sun. We have no control over how active the sun can be at one or another moment. And those are causes that we cannot escape. But there are other causes that correspond to this conditioning. We created a world in which we expect the highest outcome, and that highest outcome, for instance, translated into the industrial model of agriculture. Agriculture became a machine. At this moment, you can have a farm without any person run that farm.
Mm-hmm.
If you are now talking about the machine that produces our food, it will produce it according to the recipe that we put in, according to what is called today the algorithm that we put in. And so we would dictate that machine to create chicken that are this big and the eggs that have the following composition, but they are very far away from what the natural environment used to be. Being conditioned the way we are now in a phase of the evolution of humankind in which we become more and more subject to disease, more and more subject to behaviors that in the extreme are translated into suicides. I'll give you an example because I'm talking to a person who is part of the medical economy, so to say. Doctors commit suicide at a rate double the suicide rate of the society. Now, doctors are enlightened people. They go to school. They invest in their future. They own equipment, you name it, yeah? How come are they suicidal? They are suicidal because there is one part which is their dedication to the health of the human being, and then there is the other part in which they are conditioned through the system to operate like machines. And they are not willing, able to do that. And some find an escape in committing suicide. Unfortunately, some find an escape in no longer practicing medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, the conditioning aspect goes so far that at this moment we are affecting the destiny of the newer generation. We gave them through conditioning, we gave them a freedom that is not a freedom. It's conditioning through chemistry, conditioning through a variety of factors, and that's why, while 5 years ago the number of people who were justifiably interested in transgendering is now 10 times higher. This is the outcome of conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the outcome of a freedom. Nobody tells a person who gets involved in this operation that they are going to be drug addicts for the rest of their lives. There's no way to go through transgender and not to consume drugs for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. So, on the one hand, we are speaking about drug addiction, and on the other hand, we claim you have a right to become a drug addict for the rest of your life. Think about this huge contradiction.
I have an especially, let's just say it's not a good opinion of the law profession, all the interactions I've had with them, and you wrote quite a bit, the chapter "No Business Like Law Business." But I don't know if did you coin the term attornocracy?
Yeah,
it's a great term. I don't know how anybody could outdo that. Just says it all in one little word right there. What we've become in here. So I had a question where when we look at what we're trying to do with technology, and it's like another tool. It is to take the burden off of us. Physically, mentally, with especially as we move towards whatever we want to call AI. But I wrote you an idea question that it seems one of the professions that's highly positioned and vulnerable for AI to take over first would be the legal profession for basically what they do. And if the lawyers are basically the ones who ultimately are pulling the greatest amount of strings running the world right now, and AI is coming up like a freight train, a tsunami, will they let it take over much of their power? Because the people would want it. People don't like lawyers. And does AI have an ability to go where it wants, or is it still controlled from above down, bottom up? What's the first thing that AI, I guess, would have the greatest role in terms of taking over certain jobs or certain sectors? Is it destined to become our government, basically, if we talk about that? So you see a place where AI is inevitably heading first, or unknown?
Do you remember Watson?
Yeah.
What was the prediction when Watson made the big lines? That the doctors will become useless.
Yeah, because they used it primarily for medicine.
Okay. What's the prediction today? Many predictions. This and that category of people will be replaced by AI. None will be. New professions will occur. Is the practice of law going to change? By necessity. At this moment, it became one of the most parasitic elements of the society. They are parasites. They are parasites because they create the law in order to satisfy their power. They put into the law their own necessity. This will break down because economically it's not going to be feasible at this level. Will AI play a certain role? Minimally. AI is, at this moment, nothing else but a very powerful procedure for searching in vast databases of texts and images. Nothing else. That a high number of those texts are legal texts, that's obvious. That lawyers themselves cease to read their own documents. That's why they have secretaries who are supposed to ask secretaries to read cases. Now, the machine can do the reading way faster, but that will not replace lawyering. What will replace lawyering is the economic crisis, which they are creating.
Okay, so we can have a little optimism that the law profession might wane a little bit. Last things I want to get into in this book was some of the solutions. I can't wait to see where you will take this information. I'm going to try and polish this thing off the rest of this week here. But on the cover, though, you put a second revolution might save America. Is there any revolution that can be nonviolent at this point? We have lost hope in the polls. What else have we got other than perhaps we could use technology and the social media to take back our voice? What do you see this revolution as being?
The first revolution, the first American Revolution, was not a violent revolution. That's an illusion. There was a bit of a war with the Brits, but that was all. It was not a real revolution. The second revolution that I'm asking for is the necessity to reformulate the goals of the Union, to write a new constitution. Totally disconnected from the initial constitution. The initial constitution is an extremely biased document that reflected the power structure and the economic structure of Great Britain and those Brits who came to the United States and became the owners of this new piece of land. That constitution, which is glorified every day, is an example of what it means to be totally disconnected from reality. They knew exactly their purpose, and they took care of their purpose, and it was perfect for the first 50 years. Mm-hmm. Since then, it became a huge obstacle in the evolution of this country. It's time to have a new constitution. Therefore, I'm looking at the need to have no politician involved, only your commoner, only your citizen, various groups of citizens, reunited in a convention that can run 3, 4, 5, 6 years, doesn't matter. And each article, before it is put, so to say, into law, put out to the public and ask the public in a referendum to which extent that particular aspect corresponds to our times. Our times are of a total different nature. You cannot compare this moment in the history of humankind with the technology and science and you name it, to the moment when the so-called splendid U.S. Constitution came into existence. It was splendid then. It's no longer. It carries with it the British Empire. The British Empire doesn't exist anymore. The Brits are at this moment really the laughing stock due to the fact that they are stuck in their past. We should not be stuck in our past. That's for me the second American Revolution.
Because the people that we are not happy with in power tell us the Constitution's a living document and it's got to be changed. And we only know of one tool, a constitutional convention, which many people say you don't want to do that because you'll lose a lot of the original stuff and you never know what they'll put in that'll be more controlling. But that would only be if we put a new constitution together with the same way from the top down with the people in power. So your basic difference is find a way to let the bottom-up common person create this document from our needs, what we feel as average humans. Well, and then maybe the technology can do that to give us a vote without us all having to travel to some common place then. I think that's a great idea. All right, well, I'm optimistic about that.
Okay, there is an utopian dimension to my book, which I have to confess I'm aware of, but you cannot be optimistic without being a bit utopian.
When this paper of yours that I just read, where we were looking at the limitations of artificial intelligence because it's not really a biological entity, and since the human brain seems to involve every cell of the body, the ability to feel true emotions, love, fear, anguish, shame, and we have people say we should fear the growth of AI because it will be logical, only, and it will ultimately see humans as illogical, and we worry about it taking us over. And so people like Elon Musk with Neuralink want to keep us integrated with the computer by Neuralink, becoming more machine-like. We're already in many ways doing that. We get our artificial knees, our pacemakers, our insulin pumps, and all of these things that are making us dependent on these mechanical devices. And people will probably have no trouble adding some implant into the brain so that they can tap into the internet the way the computer is doing. And yet there's other thoughts, I'm not sure I'm the first one to come up with this, that say, well, what if we could truly give a computer program, whether it's in a Android body or not, the ability to feel emotions, to have love, to sense that. And I think you and I probably agree that's not possible in non-biological tissue, is just the way the circuits are on here. I tried to define what biologic is. I thought about, is it the presence of DNA? Is it the presence of capabilities within the cell, within the organism to replicate itself? But I tend to think that my definition of biologic is that there has to be the presence of a cell, a source of primitive conscious. And ultimately then, if we want a computer to be biologic, then instead of us putting machine parts in us, I see the hope for the future is putting cellular tissue into computers. Do you see that kind of seesaw potential here, or do you have a different idea where the AI might want to go in its development?
The subject that you approached is, for me at this moment, probably the most passionate in my life. Because having worked almost all my life from the perspective of what I call anticipatory systems, I see the living as being defined by anticipation. Only the living is able to have an awareness of the future. There is no machine in the world, and it cannot be built, that has any awareness of future. A machine is the expression of deterministic causality, which means the past determines the outcome. All the AI, in all its forms that we are aware of today, and you can go from the most primitive to the GPT of our days and all the big discussion, etc., are deterministic machines, period. Not only that, here comes the most important distinction, and that distinction is the following. Computation as we practice it in our days is a limited form of computation. It's a so-called algorithmic computation. Mm-hmm. Algorithm means give me a recipe, and if you give me a recipe for whatever it is, making soup, writing a law, writing some text, yeah? You give me the recipe, I can do it. That's the Turing machine, the algorithmic machine. The entire AI as it stands today is algorithmic. Needs a recipe and then operates on data in order to do out of that recipe whatever you want it to do. Period. Anticipation is not algorithmic. There is no recipe. The cell, since you mentioned the cell, is as anticipatory as the whole body. The body is the holistic unity of all the elements, and those elements are cells. That's the fundamental, that's the brick of life, the cell. Mm-hmm. But the amazing thing is, none of us has in his or her body two cells that are identical. All the cells in our bodies are different. Their renewal is such that each is renewed in its uniqueness. There is no AI that can handle this creative aspect of life. Now, going the next step. Anticipation is the expression of what it takes to survive. The monocell, or the virus, which is not alive, or the microbe, in order to survive, has to address the issue of metabolism. In other words, it needs energy in order to survive. If it takes more energy to get your intake than what it takes to live, you're going to die. The natural entities that we're aware of rarely go into suicide. In other words, going for using more energy than the energy they're going to get. Yeah?
So the human seems to be the only one that expends more energy than
That's correct. And that's why the issue that I bring up is, you read the article, the issue of sustainability. If I'm going to consume more resources than what it takes for our survival and well-being and whatever, where those resources are coming from something else. Yes, we eat other animals. Yes, we produce milk. Yes, we do this. We do a couple of things. And yes, we are using energy resources that pertain to our future. It cannot be sustained. After a while, if you go on this path, you are going to undermine your own right to exist.
Now that model makes sense in in an environment of finite resources. When we think of the most powerful control, the corporations, the governments, the whatever you want to call them, elite, have is they control the source of energy. And whether it be the energy that puts in your food or what lights the room in your house, I see maybe if we have enough knowledge of free energy, not in the sense where a perpetual energy machine, but devices that have come and gone and people have disappeared bringing these devices to play, where you'll be able to get the energy for free. No one can charge you for it. And there may be a small 5-watt input and gives a 5,000 watt output. That's what is the salvation, perhaps, of this paradigm where us humans consume so much more energy. We need to find a more infinite source, at least in our concept of getting off of the physical resources of the planet, perhaps the ethereal zero-point vacuum energy that we all exist in. So you're right, from the first lever we made and the first wheel we made, we were starting to use other sources of energy so that we could expend more of that. An interesting concept. I had another thought where there might be some hope for people without relying on the ever-growing presence of the social media where everybody has this incredible appetite to know what everybody else is doing. It used to be without that, we explored the world on our own. We got on our bicycles, we went for hikes. My parents didn't know where I was all day. As long as I was home for dinner, there was not the fears of me interacting with my environment. Now, fences up, people driving their kids to school, fear, fear, fear. So the natural craving, the curiosity is still there. And so the only window we're giving these kids is these phones, and we wonder why they're so addicted to them. But there's an appetite for learning what their world is. Unfortunately, if they would only be tuning in some National Geographic or studying academics on their phone instead of trying to see somebody doing something stupid. So we can have this potential for the interconnectivity of the planet to perhaps help from the ground up. But another thought was the power of the mind itself. When I try and define our senses, and we have 5 senses, and then we can say the 6th sense is proprioception, perhaps the 7th is extrasensory perception, intuitiveness. But mental telepathy is there. We know we have it. We've tested it. It's primitive, and some people seem to be better at others and understanding others' thoughts. If there is a gene, perhaps, what if somebody were to, through all the efforts we're trying to do in eugenics maybe, find a way to get the human brain more connected together. I can't help but notice from my interest in life on other planets that is apparently there, that everybody who's interacted, whether they be a military person telling me a secret or someone who has a personal experience, every interaction with some other life entity, even from another dimension perhaps, says they have extrasensory perception. They talk telepathically to each other. Maybe, do you see that as a potential bad idea, instead of someone trying to connect us all as computers, to just tweak a gene and help the human brain be more connected to others? We have words like you can be sympathetic, and others say empathetic, which means they can actually start to feel your emotions, truly experience that. Maybe the problem with us humans then is we deserve something better in terms of what our brains are capable of, not just being stupid with all our bad choices, but maybe the first thing in fixing stupidity is to upgrade the ability for some of these higher senses. Do you see that as a possibility? Do you see that as even a logical place to go for where we might need to take ourselves?
Let's be clear that our image of our senses is primitive. To talk about 5, 6, or 7, in other words, a limited number, is so primitive that I cringe every time I hear about it. No, we have a continuum of senses, which means an infinity of senses. We are not ever going to be able to have names for them. Yes, we can name something related to the sound. We can name something related to the space. That's what we do. But there is so much more to the reality in which we live, and for which the body, the organism, is fully prepared to take it in. We become aware of many things that in retrospect we say, what was that? Because we don't have a name for it. And among the things, what was that, is the sense of danger, that handshake in which in the first 3 seconds you know that the person you're going to interact with is a person you can trust or not. To which sense does that belong? Is it only reducible to the feeling in the skin? No, it's much more. So there is a richness that we kind of pushed away by giving 5 names to 5 senses and assuming that this way we define perception. Perception is infinitely rich. It's open-ended. Can we do something in order to use this wonderful endowment that we have, and for which we use only certain elements? Yeah, I think yes. And the answer is by engaging people in experiences, not by asking them to read books or giving them a lecture about. Those need to be learned through experiences. That's why I'm always promoting the idea of teaching and learning as an experience, and not as a lecture, not as here you have an assignment. That's stupidity. That's totally limiting. Create an experience in which your senses and those of those you are interacting with can come to expression freely.
Well, there you have it, folks, and that's why we called the show The Perceptional, because it's an action word at this point, an ongoing process. No bounds are known in there. Well, we're going to have to stop here. We could go on for hours, but those will be future shows. Another hour has flown by. I'm going to take the headset off now and have a little more personal interaction here. I can say that we have made it this far as a country because of perhaps a deep thought. This will be something that we will put on all of our shows at the end to make you think. This one is the sum is greater than the parts. That is called holism, holistic. Spelled with a W, spelled with an H, doesn't matter. What we see is that many systems at the individual components are very chaotic, random, And as they come together, something more cohesive, more purposeful, more collective develops. And perhaps that's what's happened with our civilization. We have made it so far, it's never been pretty. We are somehow using a collective consciousness to create a perception of what we are supposed to be and who we are going to be. That is perceptional. Let's pay attention to our elders. You are an amazing statesman, basically, at this age, and with over still 7 languages that you speak fluently at the age you're at. Folks, keep practicing. The brain will never have to get into that numb state we see so many of the elderly at. Just his book, The Civilization of Illiteracy, is over 800 pages. Take your time with it and get to it, but read Are You Stupid first. This is the place that we need to be right now. This is the most relevant to what's going on in our society. The websites we'll have at the end of the book will list the Wikipedia page, first of all, is not very comprehensive. They seem to be holding back what he has to say and what he has contributed. But from there, you'll get to his personal web pages and all the other institutions that he has been lucky enough to teach at, from MIT to the University of Texas at Dallas, and many esteemed visits to European institutions of higher learning. All of that is for your exploration to see this amazing man's journey. And I hope at that age, when I chalk a few more decades up, I'm going to be able to say that you did not make me look lazy, because right now I feel a little lazy around what you have accomplished here. So with that, I will say a very big thank you for being on our show, Professor Mihai Nadin, and we'll look forward to our future interactions, but they will be remote control. So with that, folks, that is a wrap. And in the words of Walter Cronkite, my favorite but last honest broadcaster, good day, America.